The contract landed on her desk at midnight. One name at the bottom. His. Naomi Bennett built something rare in Seoul. A luxury event design firm created by a black woman from nothing. The Bennett atelier dresses the city's most celebrated moments in silk and gold. She is 27, precise, and everything she owns, she earned. Then Richard walks back into her life, and behind him stands Kang Ji-Hwan, chairman of Kang Holdings, a man the city respects in public and fears in private. The tiger tattooed on his neck is not decoration, it is a warning. Ji-Hwan does not want her company. He wants her name beside his at the altar. And what he holds over her is not money. It is the lives of every person she employs. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. The needle pierced the silk before Naomi's hands had even registered the damage. A thread had slipped, 2 millimeters, barely visible, and still she pulled the entire seam apart. The workroom was empty at this hour, Seoul's pre-dawn traffic muffled behind floor-to-ceiling glass, and she preferred it that way. Silence meant she could hear every mistake before it became permanent. Bennett Atelier occupied the top floor of a Gangnam building that cost more than her first 5 years of profit combined. She had signed that lease the same week she got the call about her mother's funeral. She never connected the two events consciously, but she had furnished the space with her mother's colors, ivory, deep amber, the quiet gold of late afternoon, and told herself it was aesthetic, not grief. 12 seamstresses, 4 pattern cutters, a production manager named Sue, who had followed her from the basement studio where it all started, 6 years ago, when Naomi had arrived in Seoul with 2 suitcases and no fallback plan. She set the ruined seam on the table and walked to the window. The city below was starting to wake. Delivery trucks, the first subway lights, a man pushing a cart stacked with cardboard. She had built something real here, something that belonged to no one but her. Her phone vibrated against the cutting table. She ignored it for 3 full seconds. Then she crossed the room, because the display showed a name she had spent years training herself not to react to. Richard Bennett. He was already in Seoul. That was the first thing he said, not hello, not it's been a while. I'm already in Seoul. I need you to meet me. Naomi had not spoken to her father in 4 years. The last time, he had borrowed money and called it an investment. She had written it off as a lesson. I don't have time today, she said. Naomi, a pause calibrated to produce guilt. 1 hour, that's all. She pressed her thumbnail into the pad of her index finger, a habit from childhood, pressure against pressure, and said nothing, which Richard took as yes. He was waiting at a hotel in Itaewon, a private dining room on the 8th floor, and he was not alone. The man across the table stood when she entered, not from courtesy, from the particular kind of stillness that expands to fill a room when it finally moves. He was tall, the kind that registers in your spine before your eyes confirm it, and he wore a black suit made for exactly his body. A tattoo climbed the side of his neck, a tiger, dark-inked, mid-movement. Richard introduced him as Kang Ji-Hwan. Naomi recognized the name. Anyone in Seoul's business world with half a working knowledge of the underground economy recognized that name. She sat down. Her hands stayed flat on the table. Ji-Hwan slid a folder across the white tablecloth. Naomi opened it because refusing would have been a statement, and she wasn't ready to make statements yet. 3 pages, clean figures. Her company's registration documents, a debt instrument dated 14 months ago, and her father's signature at the bottom of every page. She read it twice. He used the atelier as collateral, Ji-Hwan said, for a debt that defaulted 6 weeks ago. How much? Naomi asked. Ji-Hwan named a figure. She had suspected it was significant. She had not suspected it was that. Richard cleared his throat. It's a temporary situation. Ji-Hwan and I have... You don't speak, Ji-Hwan said it without glancing at Richard. Richard stopped. Naomi turned to the last page. The debt figure sat there, specific and final. She thought about the 12 seamstresses, about Sue, who had moved her family to Seoul for this job, the production manager who had just signed a school enrollment form for his daughter. She closed the folder. "What do you want?" she asked. He watched her for a moment, not the way men usually watched her, cataloging her against some template. He was reading something else, something he had apparently already decided was there. "Your name," he said, "legally, for 1 year." The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted them. "You want me to marry you." "I want a contract, a legal arrangement that makes your father's debt disappear." He picked up his water glass. "Your employees keep their jobs, your company survives. You get 12 months and a clean exit." "And you get what?" "What I need." He set the glass down. Nothing more. Richard leaned forward. "Naomi, this is the cleanest—" "I said you don't speak." This time Ji-Hwan's voice carried an edge, and Richard pulled back like something had burned him. Naomi looked at her father, really looked at him. The quality of the suit, the hotel he had chosen, the particular way he held his shoulders, waiting to be rescued by her again. Some things never calcify into surprise. They just sit there, the same weight, year after year. She thought about the pendant at her throat, her mother's, the only thing she had carried from one life into another. "I need to see the full contract," she said. Ji-Hwan produced it from his jacket pocket, already printed, sealed. She unfolded it. 12 pages. Her eyes moved to the duration clause, the exit conditions, the breach provisions. When she reached the last paragraph, she stopped. 1 year of legal marriage. Dissolution subject to mutual agreement. No breach provisions listed for his side, only hers. She refolded the contract and set it on the table. "I'll have my lawyer review this tonight." "Your lawyer will find it clean," Ji-Hwan said. 3 firms reviewed it before you walked through that door." "I'm sure they did." He stood and buttoned his jacket with 2 precise movements. "You have until 8 tomorrow morning. After that, the debt goes to collection." He paused once at the door. "The atelier is the first asset they'll liquidate." He left. Richard started to speak. "Naomi." She picked up the contract, slid it into her bag, and walked past her father without stopping, through the hotel corridor, down the elevator, out into the Seoul evening with 12 lives folded inside her hands. The ceremony lasted 40 minutes. A registrar, 2 witnesses, and a silence that filled the room the way smoke fills a closed corridor. Naomi signed where indicated. Ji-Hwan signed where indicated. No flowers, no music, no exchanged glances, only the dry click of a pen set down on marble. Min-jae stood at the back, hands clasped. In the car afterward, Ji-Hwan waited until Min-jae raised the partition. "You understand what this is?" He kept his eyes on the window. "A contract. Nothing else lives inside it." Naomi straightened the hem of her dress. "I understood the terms before I signed them." "Your father described you as close." "My father described what he needed to describe." She watched the city moving past the glass. "So did you." Ji-Hwan turned. She was already looking away. He had expected something, a flinch, a question, maybe anger dressed as composure. What he received was stillness, not performance, not suppression, something older than either and harder to read. The residence he kept in Gangnam occupied the top 2 floors of a building with no name on its exterior. Staff had been informed. A suite had been prepared. Ji-Hwan walked Naomi through the layout the way a man shows a client around a property, efficiently, without warmth, lingering nowhere. She set her bag on a chair and faced the room in silence. He left, took the connecting corridor to his wing, and stayed there. He came back once, past midnight, for a folder left on the table in the shared lounge. He moved quietly out of habit. The door to her suite stood open 2 inches, enough for light to pass through. Ji-Hwan stopped. She stood at the mirror with her back to the door, reaching for the clasp at her neckline. The dress came loose, and there they were, the scars, long and pale against deep skin, crossing the upper back and curving around her left side. Not the marks of an accident, the kind of marks that require repetition. He stepped back before she turned. She heard him anyway. She pulled the dress up slowly, without rushing, without glancing toward the door. Her hands were steady. She reached for the wrap on the hook beside the mirror and covered herself. Then she turned, and her face held nothing that required translation. "The door was open," Ji-Hwan said. "I know." 3 seconds. 4. "How?" "You married me," Naomi said, "because you think you know my family." She fastened the wrap at her shoulder. "You don't." She crossed the room and closed the door. Ji-Hwan stood in the corridor a long moment before walking to his wing. He poured 2 fingers of scotch and left them untouched on the windowsill. He had built this marriage around one certainty, that Naomi Bennett was Richard's daughter, Richard's pride, Richard's stake in the game, the cleanest wound he could open. He had been certain. The scars did not fit that story. He called Min-jae at 6 in the morning. "I need everything on her, not the company, her, before the company." Min-jae arrived with a preliminary file within the hour. Ji-Hwan read it standing at the kitchen counter, still in yesterday's shirt. The file held gaps where a father's presence should have been. Naomi had enrolled in design school in London at 19 on a partial scholarship and 2 part-time jobs. No financial support from Richard. No joint appearances in any period. The atelier had been incorporated 7 years ago, with capital she had raised herself, 3 private investors, none connected to Richard Bennett. Ji-Hwan set the file down. When did contact stop? Best we can establish, when she was 17. Min-jae kept his voice level. There's no clean break on record, it just stopped. She built all of this without him. Yes. Over the following 4 days, Ji-Hwan's people dug deeper. What they found arrived in fragments: a flight taken alone at 17, a year with no fixed address, a hospital record in Manchester that had been flagged and quietly buried. Ji-Hwan read each page the way he read intelligence reports, twice, without expression. On the 3rd day, Min-jae separated one file from the others and placed it directly in front of him. The Manchester record. Whoever buried it knew exactly which system to access. This was not a hospital clerk. Ji-Hwan looked up. Who had access to Bennett records at that time? 3 people we can confirm, possibly a 4th. Min-jae paused. 1 is dead. The 2nd retired years ago. The 3rd still works for Richard. Ji-Hwan set the page down. Richard had described their relationship as close, had implied she depended on him, that the marriage would carry his blessing into her life, open doors she couldn't reach alone. That was the framework Ji-Hwan had accepted without verification, because it served the architecture of what he was building. The woman who had signed that contract and spent her first night in his residence, requesting nothing from anyone, she had needed Richard Bennett for nothing in a very long time. Richard had lied. Not about the company, not about the debt, about her. The last document arrived on the 5th day. Min-jae brought it himself and laid it on the desk without annotation. Ji-Hwan read it twice, then he sat back. 15 years ago, when Richard had moved against the Kang family and dismantled everything Ji-Hwan's father had built, Ji-Hwan had always believed Richard operated from outside, exploiting a moment of exposure. That was the story the evidence had told. This document told a different story. The exposure was not accidental. Someone inside the organization had mapped the accounts, flagged the transfer schedule, and passed the information 3 days before Richard's people moved. Too precise for opportunism. Too specific for coincidence. The collaborator had never been identified. Ji-Hwan's hand rested flat on the page. Around him, the organization had reorganized and shed people across 15 years, but some had stayed through every restructuring, present at every table because they had always been there. Min-jae was still standing at the door. Who else has seen this? Only me. Keep it that way. Ji-Hwan looked back at the page. The receiving party's name was redacted, but the routing code beside it matched a structure he recognized. One that still existed, still active, still reporting to someone who had sat across from him at the table where he had first proposed the marriage arrangement. The room was very quiet. Ji-Hwan did not move from the desk. The routing code was 11 digits. He had memorized Choi Dae-sung's account structures years ago, the way a general memorizes terrain. The match took less than 3 seconds. And after those 3 seconds, the entire architecture of the past 6 months shifted in his mind, like weight redistributing across a broken floor. Min-jae found him there 20 minutes later. Ji-Hwan turned the folder toward him and waited while his second read. Min-jae's jaw tightened, the tell of a man who recognized something that should have been visible much sooner. How long? Min-jae asked. 4 years before Richard Bennett's first move against my father. That code was already in place. Min-jae set the folder down. Then the marriage was a lever. Ji-Hwan leaned back. She was chosen because she was valuable to him. That was the whole calculation. And now? The question sat between them. Naomi had been awake for hours. The apartment had a small library off the east hallway, and she had taken to reading there when the hours ran long. She was 3 steps from the door when she heard Ji-Hwan's voice through it, low, deliberate, the register he used when he was not performing authority, but actually holding it. She stopped. She had survived a long time by reading rooms. She stayed still anyway, because something in the particular flatness of his voice had already made the choice for her. She was chosen because she was valuable to him. That was the whole calculation. The words arrived without ceremony, no pause, no framing, just a sentence complete and self-sufficient, falling into the silence of the hallway and into Naomi's chest with the specific gravity of something she had been unwise to stop expecting. She stood there, a lever. She thought about the night she had agreed to the marriage. The employees' names on the ledger, the story she had told herself, this is what you do when someone leaves you no other option. She had believed she was being pragmatic. She had believed she was choosing. She was still in the hallway when the door opened. Min-jae saw her first. He stepped back without speaking, and the shift in his posture told Ji-Hwan to turn. Ji-Hwan turned. Naomi looked at him the way she might examine a document, reading for what was actually there, not for what had been offered. How long, she said, did you know I was chosen specifically? From the beginning. She nodded once, the nod of someone confirming what they should have kept expecting. Min-jae left the room without being asked. You needed a lever, she said. Yes. And I was the right instrument because my father thought he owned me, which in Richard Bennett's accounting comes to the same thing as love. Ji-Hwan said nothing. That was also an answer. The pendant rested against her collarbone. She touched it once, reflex only, the way someone presses a bruise to confirm it still hurts. My father used me, she said, because he thought I belonged to him. You used me because you thought I belonged to him. She let one breath pass. Neither of you ever asked who I belonged to. Something moved across Ji-Hwan's face, older than guilt, without a proper name. You belong to yourself, he said. He meant it. She heard that he meant it, which was exactly the part that cut, because a man who understood that she belonged to herself had still, 6 months ago, decided she would function as a mechanism. Comprehending something and choosing accordingly are 2 separate moral events. He had arrived at the second only when there was nothing left to act toward. She picked up her bag from the chair near the door. She had kept it packed for 3 days, some instinct in her body knowing before her mind had agreed to know. I'm leaving. I know. She waited. Old muscle memory, the pause where a woman shaped by other people's decisions waits to locate the obstacle. Ji-Hwan stayed where he was, hands at his sides. He was the still center of a life constructed around control, and he was choosing, right now, to release it. She registered this. She put it somewhere she would not open for a long time. She walked out. The elevator took 40 seconds. She counted. It gave her mind something manageable to hold, while the rest of her processed what her body was already doing, moving, purposeful, choosing a direction. The lobby was quiet at this hour. The night doorman looked up, and she met his eyes, and he opened the door. Seoul at 4 a.m. carried a lower pitch, the city breathing rather than speaking. She stepped onto the pavement and the air moved against her face, and she stood there for one moment before she started walking. What the pendant contained she had yet to discover. Whether the code Ji-Hwan held would reach her in the street, that she couldn't answer yet. What she knew was that her hands were steady and her feet were moving, and somewhere beneath everything that had cracked open tonight, something in her remained intact. She kept walking. The city wrapped around her, indifferent and alive, and she moved through it like a woman who had learned, a long time ago, that forward was the only direction no one could hold from her. The call came at 2 a.m. Min-jae's voice was flat. Someone had entered the design studio. The locks had been bypassed with clean precision. 2 boxes gone, cardboard, taped, labeled in her handwriting, Evelyn's things. Everything else untouched. Ji-Hwan was dressed before Min-jae finished the sentence. The studio smelled of cut paper and cold air. Naomi stood in the doorway and looked at the empty shelf. She had brought those boxes here 6 months ago and left them sealed, to a place that was hers, because she could not leave them in a storage unit like unclaimed furniture. They knew, she said. Ji-Hwan said nothing. He was looking at her, at the pendant against her throat. Her hand moved there without thought. The rectangular locket, gold worn smooth at the edges, lighter than it should have been. She had worn it every day since her mother died. The clasp had always seemed fused, or she had never tried with enough intention. Min-jae set a small toolkit on the table. Ji-Hwan crossed the room and stopped in front of her. May I? She unclasped the chain herself and held the pendant under the work light. The seam was there, hairline thin, invisible without looking. She pressed the edge with a thumbnail and the back panel slid free. Inside, against a layer of compressed felt, was a device no larger than a thumbnail, matte black, with a micro port along one side. So-yeon arrived 20 minutes later, laptop under her arm. The files decrypted in 11 minutes. Evelyn Bennett had been meticulous. Ledger transfers, time-stamped communications, shell company registrations, the financial architecture of a conspiracy 15 years deep. Payments from Richard Bennett to intermediaries. Intermediaries routing funds to accounts that dissolved within 90 days. Then the second column. Ji-Hwan stood very still. 3 holding companies, each dissolving into the next. The beneficial owner at the end of the chain, Choi Dae-sung. Beside Ji-Hwan for 15 years, not as an ally, as the man who had unlocked the door for Richard to walk through. Naomi watched him absorb it. She had seen grief before, the collapses men tried to hide. This was different. This was 15 years of decisions. Every alliance, every cruelty, every direction followed. All of it built on a map someone had drawn to keep him looking the wrong way. He came to me the month after my father died, Ji-Hwan said. His voice stayed even. He told me Richard Bennett had orchestrated it. He handed me a direction. So-yeon's fingers paused over the keyboard. He handed you a leash. By morning, Taesong had moved. Min-jae's network flagged it in sequence, accounts frozen, a communication routed to Richard's legal team, a jet fueled at Gimpo. He was detonating. If he could engineer the collapse himself, he could walk away from the rubble, while Ji-Hwan and Richard destroyed each other. Ji-Hwan made 3 calls in 6 minutes. Then he turned to Naomi. He will come after you. The records. Already uploaded, Soo-yeon said. Ji-Hwan looked at Naomi. She met his gaze. Go, she said. Acknowledgement, not permission. He nodded once and walked out. What followed took 72 hours. Naomi sat with Soo-yeon across a long table and built the case, account by account, cross-referencing her mother's records against Kang Holdings' existing documentation. Richard's financial exposure landed first, a regulatory referral that moved faster than his lawyers had anticipated. Daesung's accounts were frozen by the third evening. Ji-Hwan's organization received the evidence before the authorities did. Every man who had followed Daesung because he stood at Ji-Hwan's right hand, now seeing exactly who had been standing there. That was intentional. Richard Bennett lost his Seoul holdings, his leverage across 3 Pacific trade agreements, and the mechanism he had used against his daughter for 2 decades. The call he placed to her went unanswered. She felt tired. The specific exhaustion of a weight set down after so long you had forgotten you were even carrying it. Ji-Hwan came to her office on the 4th day. He placed a document on the table, the marriage agreement, fully restructured. Bennett Atelier returned to sole ownership. Her name, clear of encumbrances. You may leave Seoul, he said. No consequence, no obligation. A pause. I won't ask you to stay. She looked at the document, then at him. He was telling her the truth. She recognized it because truth looked different on his face than anything else she had seen there. She signed. She stayed in the room. The event opened on a Friday evening. She had designed the ballroom, the lighting, the angles, the way the ceiling drew the eye upward toward the glass and the city suspended beyond it. She wore ivory, the back cut wide and low. Her scars were visible. She had simply chosen a dress she liked. Ji-Hwan was standing across the room when she arrived. He watched her move through the space she had built, the way a man looks at something he has only now understood the weight of. He walked toward her. He extended his hand and stopped. He waited. She looked at his open palm, everything it had cost to arrive here, every wall, every wound, and then the choice to let her go and still stand between her and the fire, without ever making it a transaction. Naomi placed her hand in his. This time, she chose. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever hidden wounds beneath a flawless surface? Have you ever been used as a weapon by someone you trusted? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about revenge, truth, and dignity, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.